Hi, I'm Jeff Walter, and welcome back to the podcast. My guest today is Jake Wharton. Jake is the director of franchise growth at Bloomin Blinds. He's a technical-minded, results-driven professional with a comprehensive background in sales, product management and development, and operational leadership. Paired with a strong analytical and technical skills that are reinforced with his degrees from A&M, and that's multiple degrees. Good job, great school. Loved my time there, not as a student, but as a visitor to other students. So it was great. I enjoyed my time there, let's just say. He's a his professional journey includes in building materials has given him an extensive experience in manufacturing, executing pricing strategies, multi-channel sales management, and team training. Jake, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for agreeing to talk about Bloomin Blinds and franchise training and all that good stuff.
No, happy to be here, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
So Jake, I'm always curious about how people end up where they end up. I ended up where I'm at. I never thought I'd end up in Michigan, and I've been here for 25 years. At a school, I was down, as we were just talking, I was down in Houston, and I thought I would never be in a cold weather climate again. And then, a little while ago, an opportunity came, and poof, I found myself in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I thought I would never see winter snow again. And now I'm snowmobiling for.
Yeah, now I can't leave.
Yeah, now I can't leave. Exactly. So, but how'd you end up where you're at Bloomin Blinds? Tell us a little about Bloomin Blinds and your role there, and how you ended up there.
Yeah, so Bloomin Blinds is a window coverings franchise. We're specialized in window coverings in the home space, right? So nothing commercial, primarily residential. But I came to know Bloomin actually through family. My father was in window coverings for a majority of his career, and he actually got to know the founding family, the Stewart brothers, while he was working with Norman Window Fashions. And he came aboard to work with them, I think, in 2021, 2022. And they had an opportunity to start opening a new division of theirs in the fabrication space. And they had reached out to me to oversee that division of theirs. And so it would have been, about a year and a half ago, maybe 18 months ago. They asked me to come aboard. And so I joined the team to oversee that little division of theirs for a few months. Things seemed to go relatively well, and they decided, I think there may be a good spot for you to come work with us on the business development side and start working with our franchisees as a business coach and lead the growth portion of it. And so they brought me onto the corporate team, and I've been with them ever since. I think that was end of February, March of this year. So it's been a good transition.
And so, about how many units or franchise locations does Bloomin Blinds have?
So right now we're at 155 units, and that's about 80 franchise locations.
Okay. And when you say franchisees with multiple locations, is that
correct? Yeah. So the territories break out between the 80 franchise owners, right?
Yeah. So so congratulations, you passed that 100 unit mark, which is one of those milestones on the franchise development. I mean, you get there, it's like you've arrived. So congratulations.
That's what I've been told. Yeah, no, thankfully they set up a good team before I'd gotten here. And so it was just a matter of taking the baton and continuing the growth. But yeah, no, they've built a solid foundation for us to work off of. And it's been quite a ride.
So let's talk, and it's interesting because it seems like with your background, we did talk, you undergrad, you were in the building materials chemistry, I think it was, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And so recently into the franchise space or working with the network. What's been the biggest surprise for you there? Just, working with franchisees versus, physical materials.
I think the biggest shock to me was how similar they are. In previous world, working with a manufacturer, primarily most of our customers were all independent business owners, right? And so while they were selling our products, they weren't really tied to us to a certain degree, right? We were always, vouching for them to buy more of ours versus competitors. Whereas now, they are carrying our brand and our title, and regardless, they're always going to be part of our team. But in the same way, I still get carried away calling our franchisees our dealers, even though they are our team. But it's funny because I'm still coaching the same way I was before, right? It's just a different relationship we have with them now. Like, I'm not actively trying to court them to buy more of our product, but instead we're actively having meetings with them to go through, okay, are you utilizing the tools we have? Which manufacturers do you have the better relationship with? How are you utilizing the advantages in your market to continue to grow and build your business? It was shocking to me how similar the job was before to the one that I'm in now, even though that the acronyms are different, the people you work with run, or the relationship is so uniquely different, but the roles, the responsibilities, the day-to-day piece of the job is so eerily similar. I just did not see that actually working out that way.
Well, that worked great for you, though. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, no, I can't
good,
complain.
a
Yeah.
lot of transferable
Yeah,
skill.
you come into it kind of worried, like, oh, I'm gonna have to figure out how to do this,
Yeah,
and then you have the first couple of meetings. Oh, okay, I've done this before, huh?
yeah. So yeah, I guess the brothers were not naive in what in there, and
They knew something I didn't know. That's
they
for
knew
sure.
they knew you'd be a good fit. Well, and the other thing too, it's interesting. Like it's I've talked to other people, and it's like you get something like that, and it's similar but different, and then you approach it slightly differently because I think there's a tendency sometimes in the franchise space because they're a captive audience, right? And I've seen that in some of the automotive franchises where they're carrying that brand name. Yeah, it's you have this captive distribution network, right?
Right.
And sometimes you can whereas when you're using distributors, or resellers, they're not captive, right? And they're usually selling competitors' products, like you said, and you're vying for market share. And so I got to imagine that mindset of I want to partner with you to make you successful, which makes me successful, is being very is beneficial, and
Yeah,
is helping with the network grow the network.
yeah, and I think that it's that. I'm glad you said it that way because I think it's that attitude or that outside view that I think brought some benefit to the system. Right, as they're used to speaking to people that came from the franchising space that treated them a certain way or acted a certain way, and so it was a lot of the same rinse and repeat process. And so having someone from an outside industry, while granted they may be doing the same thing, but all of a sudden they're using different words to say the same thing. I don't know, it almost brought a different level of respect and thought to it. And all of a sudden, when you have a different attitude, you get a different level of buy-in.
Uh,
And it seemed to work, right? So,
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, and this is on anything, whether it's business partners or what I've noticed with staff or clients, it's like if you're going into it with a true partnership mentality and how can we both do better, and I respect you and and your autonomy, even though we might be bound by some contractual agreement, then people want to work together because you're looking out for each other's interests and you're authentic in what you're trying to do, and that
yeah.
leads to better outcomes. It's actually kind of cool.
No, I mean, if you think about it, that's really the only way you want to do business, right? I mean, you think
Yeah,
about, like, I had somebody once mention, thankfully it wasn't referring to us, but someone mentioned it could be like a bad divorce, right? As you
right.
get into it, get into a franchise, and you're married, and if I really went out of this, it ends up being just a messy divorce, right? I don't want to be part of that, but a a good relationship ends up being a positive one, right? We work together. This thing works
Exactly.
well for me. It works well for you. And the reality is, you really only want to be in a business that works that way, or at least you should only want to be in one.
Well, I kind of going down that trail, I've before we did Latitude Learning, which we're a software company, but even as Latitude Learning, but before that, built a couple of consulting practices, and it's interesting because you see all different types of clients, and the ones that treat you as a vendor that way, um, we just were able to accomplish amazing things, right?
Mhm.
And then we'd have clients along the way that would be like, "No, I'm paying you. You do whatever I say," like almost like I own you.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that kind of and it's like, okay, well, you're giving me $1 to do something, so I'm going to do something, but you don't get that 1 + 1 = 3 thing,
Mhm.
right? You get that 1 + 1 = 1.5, because there's this friction going on,
Yeah.
and but switching it back to the your franchisees, one of the things that my understanding is that you're responsible for is getting these guys trained up and on board tell me about how a new franchisee would come in, how you onboard them. I imagine with the window coverings, they're on the sales side. There's obviously a million different options, right? And so you got to have educated salespeople, but then also the installers. It's a skill. You got to be able to do it right,
Yeah.
and you're messing with people's homes or their offices or their places of business. So you do want to make sure you don't screw it up. Take us through. What are you guys trying to accomplish when you do the training or your training program, and then who are you training and how do you do that and how do you overcome the challenges and all that kind of fun stuff?
Yeah. So, I mean, with franchising, it's a mixed bag with who comes on board, right? I mean, when an owner comes on, their experience could be, you know, just about anything, right? They could have lots of window covering experience coming and work with a competitor before, or absolutely none. And the same goes with any kind of organizational experience, whether or not they were in marketing, operations, sales. They're good with their hands. And so, really, we have to make sure that we're entirely comprehensive in every aspect of the business, both knowing how to operate a business in general, regardless whether it's in window coverings or what have you, and then making them a window coverings expert and then an
Right.
installation expert as well. And so, that process for us really starts with the beginning and understanding they know we're setting up your business, right?
Right.
And then stepping them through each one of those hoops and beginning with the funding piece, right? And beginning with setting up the business, how they've chosen to structure it. And then we start going through the process of, okay, now we're going to start educating you on window coverings, whether it's a virtual learning process where we bring them in person to start touching through this stuff. And that's when the fun really, at least for me, um, really begins on when we get to introduce the sales part of it, right? We get to
Right.
start going through understanding their market, what their competition looks like, what their strengths are as a professional, and how we can leverage those to build their brand presence locally. And then how we can build that into whatever their general business plan is. And then hopefully, I mean, I'm always preferential to those that have a sales and marketing background because that typically lends to us being able to build out a really robust plan for them. But then laying out the groundwork for how we're going to essentially attack their market. What are the strengths for them? Do they have a network that already exists wherever they're starting to set up shop? Or do we need to start laying out the grassroots marketing plan for how you're going to start building these relationships locally? The training process as it exists primarily revolves around getting them the knowledge they need in window coverings. It's very seldom that we find somebody that already has that knowledge,
Right.
but it's a 6-week course on both primarily focused around that product knowledge piece. And as they
Okay.
get more comfortable with it, we start to integrate the sales into it, right? And then as they get more of that into it, we start to build in the marketing piece to it, the business plan into it, what that strategic step by step process looks like into it. And it all sorts to come together as they walk through this process at the point to where once they're ready to open their door, they almost have 3 sets of plans that more or less fold into one so that they're really just following a recipe like any good franchise will have
Right.
on what that first year is going to look like for you so you can scale this business into something that's growing and building for you like you intended when you came to franchising in the first place.
So you mentioned earlier, it's interesting because I was talking to somebody the other day and they were like, hey, a franchisor needs to do three things for franchisees, right? They
Mhm.
need to help them, identify prospects and give them the tools to do that, close deals and give them the knowledge and tools to do that, and then deliver whatever the service is or whatever the product is, and give them the skills to be able to do that. And so you said you had this 6-week course. You had mentioned e-learning. New owner comes on board. Is there a regiment of self-study e-learning that they do before, and then do they come to headquarters, or how does that work?
Yeah. So, and I'm probably selling myself short there. So, there's a 6-week program that involves a onboarding piece. That's e-learning, right? So,
Right.
as they onboard, there's 4 weeks of that that consists of an e-learning portion, both
Okay.
in the new product training as well as the business creation portion, right? We want to teach them how to essentially create and run that business from an e-learning perspective. Then we bring them in person, right? We bring them out to Dallas to go through the physical product knowledge and training with our training team here locally. Once that portion has been completed and they're actually sent out in the field to open their business, we then have a 12-week post launch, post training that is essentially my time with them to start going through the infield process where we get to actually share the experience they've had in the field, go through the business plans and the marketing plans they've built and start making adjustments and start teeing up to say, okay, which parts of the plan that we built are working, which parts are didn't, and we get to actually start making adjustments, right?
Okay. Is that more like a 12-week mentor coaching type of thing?
A little bit of
Like
both, right? So,
like you came in, we built out your plan, and now we're
mhm,
executing the plan, and so we've got this
mhm.
3-month consultative coaching
In a sense,
or advisory or however you want to. But
yeah, no, in a sense, the only reason I would consider it more of that learning portion of it is because
yeah.
the consultation process, right? And
Right.
the ability to sell to customers, while we cover a decent chunk of that or a majority of that in both the e-learning and in the physical in-person training, there's only so much that you can do without
Right.
actually getting in front of customers. And so
Yeah.
once they're actually in the field and talking to people, they actually are all this. Now they actually have a taste for it. And so being able to have some coaching back and forth as they're in the
Hmm.
field and doing this, that portion of training, while you can, and you've probably gotten familiar with this, is I can teach them and coach them up as much as possible, but until they actually get in front of somebody and start having the opportunities to have to say the things and use the verbs that we've talked about, until we get to actually run through that over the last 12 weeks of that onboarding process, once they're actually in the field, they really won't know, or at least we won't know how well they're going to use those techniques until we get the chance to go through it with them in person. And so that's the only reason I would treat that as a training prospect, because while we are
Yeah.
making changes to their marketing plan, understanding how well they'll treat a customer, how well they'll be able to react to a customer and make those final sales adjustments have to be done in the field.
Well, what I find really interesting, and I agree 100% with you on it's part of the training. Yeah, because we're big believers in learn, do, teach in terms of
Mm.
developing mastery, in terms of pedagogy, right? And one of the interesting things in this industry, and being a learning platform, we get to see a lot of different companies implement a lot of different training programs, and and we help them do that. But you get to see a lot, right? And one of the things, and I said this at the IFA down Miami, one of the things we do a really good job as learning and development professionals is we're really like if if and as an industry from franchising or any type of extended learning, extended enterprise, if you train partners, resellers, dealers, suppliers, yeah, and employees, we do a really good job on that first part, the learning part, the knowledge acquisition, getting the people to understand, being able, and I always compare it to, getting your driver's license. And we as an industry do a really good job on prepping you for the written test, right? The
Yep.
getting the knowledge. I know what the yellow line means. I know what the red light means. I know what that octagon that's red means. And I can spew it out on a multiple choice test, and I've got the knowledge. What's interesting about your program is I'd say like 90% or more, maybe 95% of the programs out there, that's where they stop. And then the next piece is the development, the skill development. That's L&D, learning and development, knowledge acquisition, skill development. And most programs will stop at the D because of what you just laid out. Skill development is about practice and coaching, right? I got to be able to do it or try it, maybe in a safe environment, maybe out in the wild, but I got to like do it. And then I got to have some knowledgeable coach say, that was good, but try doing, when you hit this, try doing that. Right. Or,
Yep.
you're in it. Yeah, and especially in the franchise space, because while you're selling a, a turnkey business, as it were, with a set of processes, the local environment is always a little different. Like I was talking to a guy yesterday, and they focus on their franchise. They focus on senior care, and so not only is the law different from state to state, but the options that are available, they're like a matchmaking service, right? So
Okay.
you
Yeah.
you're looking for a place either for yourself, for long term care. You have some health needs, and maybe you need some in home help. Maybe you need to go to assisted living or independent living or something like that. And they're like a matchmaking. But my point is, like, there's all this idiosyncratic local knowledge, right? Because there's only so many providers in a given area, and they all have different quality, skill, and all that kind of stuff. And so we're talking about how do you get that idiosyncratic knowledge. But what I like about what you were just saying is that the 12-week program it's a systematized coaching to develop skills. It's that when the rubber meets the road, it's getting out and driving, right? I passed my written test, and then most programs say, okay, here are the keys, go drive. And that's not how we learn how to drive, right? Right? We have somebody that already knows. It might
Mm.
be a paid coach, it might be a parent or an older sibling or something like that, and They take you out into a parking lot in a safe environment so you can practice, and then they go, okay, let's pull out onto the street and let's go. I think you're ready to go hit the street without, killing both of us. So,
Right,
um,
yeah, and it's unique because even like you just said, every market's just uniquely different, and then the individuals themselves, um, you know, how that 12 weeks ends up developing on where their particular strengths and weaknesses lie, changes not only from cohort to cohort, but from individual to individual. I
yeah,
mean, those coaching calls or even where they end up on week 12 can vary almost by 180 degrees. I mean, I have that strength, or naturally I want to incline to focusing on that sales and marketing perspective. But we've had some that really it's the operational piece, right? How can I focus
yeah,
on making sure I'm getting those measurements right? What are the little tips and tricks that I know to make sure that products are always getting installed and not having a reorder thing? Like just it's so interesting to see that the person, both the market and personality, and how that creates some different path along that 12-week training course. But absolutely right. It's being able to actually have them walk that walk, because you can have a certain level of confidence that people that come into training is like, oh yeah, I've got this, but it's having a plan and keeping it as soon as you get punched in the mouth.
yeah. Everybody has a battle plan, and
Yeah,
until they get, or no, was it Mike Tyson said that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the
everyone
mouth?
has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Yeah,
But yeah, it's interesting because the gentleman I was talking to Patrick Sanchez over at Franchise Fastlane, and
yeah,
he's the one that said, three things: prospecting, closing, delivering. And when we were talking about the match, and you just kind of hit on, he goes, usually you have somebody who's good at one of those, maybe two, never
yep.
three. And
Hmm.
so there's always, like you said, there's always something different. Okay, so kind of continuing on the journey, comes in, does the initial 6 week, which brilliant, do the self study so you get that baseline of knowledge. Come to headquarters, to take it to the next level because now you're dealing with people that really know this, and the new guy the new franchisee, the new owner has a base level knowledge, and then they launch and they have the 12-week coaching, which is really fantastic. What happens with their staff? Like that's on the franchise owner side. Are they usually starting off as a one-man show, or are they usually ramping up staff? How does, as they bring staff on, do the staff get educated?
Yeah, so typically, now it varies, right? But typically they start as an owner operator. Now, depending on what they envision for their business, we've had cases where owners have come in and they want to operate as a absentee owner. So they come in, purchase the business, and they'll come through training, but they'll bring like a general manager with them, or they'll hire a technician with that general manager with the intent of them operating the business while the owner maintains whatever their previous position or role might have been. But typically in that owner operator model, after they hit certain milestones or benchmarks, we'll begin making suggestions, or more or less nudging them in the direction of hiring technicians, depending on whether or not they want to follow a certain layout of their business structure. So there's typically a couple different roles they can follow, depending on the size. Either I mean, the most common one is that typically our owner operators want to continue to operate as their salesman. They like doing the consultation process, but they no longer want to function in the role where they're doing the installations
Hmm.
for the sales that they make. So they'll want to hire a technician who will do their installs for them. And that's typically where we help them not only identify kind of the traits that they're looking for in those individuals, but once they've had a chance to maybe find somebody that they like, bring them on board and shadow them for a while, we'll bring them back in for that initial 2-week training course where we can get them on board to go through whatever training it is that they went through during their onboarding process,
Okay,
and then release them back out. So they don't do the entire owner's training, but
right.
they do the product portion of that training that we have in person here in Dallas.
Okay, so I'm a new owner. I go through it. I launch the thing.
Mhm.
Initially I want to be an owner operator. I got the Blooming Brands. It's great. It's a great brand. I'm out there. I'm selling, and all of a sudden I get more work than I can do. I want to bring somebody in to do the installs, right? So I hire a technician. And are those e-learning courses available? Like, do they do the same thing? They go through some e-learning
Mhm.
path, not the entire thing because they're not learning how to run a
Sure.
business and do marketing sales, but a subset that's geared towards technicians, right? They do that and then do the in-person training back in Dallas? Is that how that
Correct.
works?
Yeah. So they'll essentially do that there's a 1 week portion of that course that's product specific, right?
Okay.
So we'll run them through that portion of the course. And that's before they essentially have to pass that portion of the course before they'll come in for the 2 week in person. Now, what we typically recommend for those individuals that are coming in for technician training is that they spend some time with the owner in the van prior to coming to in-person training
Okay.
for a couple of reasons. One, we want them to get some field experience since they have the ability to do so with the owner, primarily because we've had some cases where an owner has hired somebody and wanting to get them on board as quickly as possible doesn't get the chance to spend as much field time with that individual as we'd like them to, right? They may
Right.
have interviewed them a couple of times, decided this guy's good, and then brought them on board and then sent them right to training. Well, they didn't really get to know them all that well first, right? They didn't get to learn their work aptitudes, how well they handle in the van, how well they are in front of customers. So we encourage them to spend some time with them, at least, 4 to 6 weeks, shadowing them, or at least having this new technician shadow them in the van, get to know
Okay.
them, or make sure they can pick up on these things before they decide to put the initial investment into sending them into Texas to
Right.
participate in that training process.
And I would imagine during that 4 to 6 weeks, that's when they're doing the online, they're
Correct.
that 1 week online course, which,
Yeah.
it's self-paced, so you do it whenever you.
Now we still have them complete that basically towards the end or right before they would come into Texas.
Right.
We wouldn't necessarily have them do that essentially right after they're hiring.
Okay.
But we do that essentially once they've had the opportunity to fully vet them. We wouldn't want to have a case where they've started investing additional assets into someone, not
Right.
knowing if they are there for the long haul, so to speak.
Okay. All right. So then from an employee standpoint, the franchise employee, typical first thing that they would do is end up hiring technicians.
Mhm.
It's a typical owner operator situation. Then you're bringing in technicians because they're selling more than they can deliver, or they've been doing it a while and they don't want to do the installs anymore, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
And
either
what
or,
you'll
depending
see,
on what lifestyle that you want.
yeah, and more often than not, Jeff, what we see is that what happens early on, or at least when a franchisee begins to hit their stride, is they'll get into this sort of oscillating cycle of sales to
Right.
where they'll end up having their first good month. And then the next month, they'll spend a majority of their time installing
Yep.
all of those jobs they just sold. And because of that, their schedule is so full that they actually can't get to all the consultations they had before until the following month. And so they'll have a high month in sales. Then the next month will be a little lower because they installed all that work. And then the next month they'll jump back up again. And then the next month they'll go back down. And that's usually the first indicator. It's like, okay, we're getting to that point now where we know you need to have at least a part-time or a third-party installer to free up your time so you can get back out there and keep selling. But that's usually the first indicator. We can see that oscillating margin start to move.
Yeah, I'm laughing because as you're saying that, it brought back these memories. It said earlier, before I started Latitude as a software company, I built a number of practice IT consulting practices for some of the larger organizations out there, and usually start from scratch, right? You
Right.
know, as a practice manager with just a couple of people, and I'm laughing because we experienced the exact same thing, right? Like you'd have a senior guy like myself, a practice leader who understands the market and he's out there pressing flesh and identifying prospects, closing deals, and it's like, okay, we got this project, let's go. And then I put on my project management hat, right?
Yeah.
I take off my sales hat. I got my sales hat on and I put on my project management hat and I've got like more business. I've got like half a dozen, when we're starting off, you got a couple people, half a dozen people. I got them all booked for the next 2-3 months. And we're like, I got no time to go out and sell because I oversold, right?
Yep.
and then
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden there's like this cliff happens. And, and we used to call it the cliff. The cliff is coming, cliff is coming. I got to stop doing the work. I got to get back out and sell because everybody's going to end up on the beach soon. And then you had this like you said, this oscillating roller coaster of, okay, now put on the sales hat again, go back out,
Get back out there.
and eventually you got to, okay, I need a project manager I can trust to actually deliver this, so we can focus on it. It's some completely different business models, right? But it's the same type of thing. It's that owner operator, that startup
It's the
thing.
exact same problem. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. That's why I was laughing. So then and then if somebody grows to a point where they I would imagine a number of your franchisees, they bring on more technicians, and they start, as they're growing, they bring on sales folks. Is it the same type of process for bringing on a sales folk? You know, like shadow, do the portion of the e-learning that is related to, marketing and sales, and
Mhm.
then come into headquarters to get some additional training, or how does that work for
Yeah,
sales?
no, that first process would follow the exact same model. Now, what I would add to that is typically that a salesperson, and what we've started to implement now is that supplemental training for that sales individual. So similar to what the owner had, where we have that 12-week course where we're meeting with them regularly as they onboarded. We do something similar for those salespeople, to where now they're having something shorter, but
Right.
in something equivalent, to where we're actually going to consistently meet with them to go over how these consultations went, so we can continue to help coach them into understanding how to leverage certain situations and continue to use the verbiage that we went over, like we had with the owner the first time they came on board. Primarily because we want them to be able to utilize the same coaching we had done with the owner,
Right.
right? So we can start to utilize what they had practiced in training, and then start
Okay.
to understand how they can best leverage it in real world scenarios.
So on the sales side, did they come to Dallas, or they go right from the e-learning to the coaching?
They'll still come to Dallas and do
Okay.
product training. They'll do the e-learning portion of with products, and then come to Dallas doing the product training. But then we'll have a segment essentially that's coaching specifically towards the sales process. Be shorter. They won't require as much time because we won't have a business plan, a marketing plan to go over,
Right.
but we'll be strictly going over their consultations and reviewing how they're utilizing the verbiage and the certain manufacturers and leveraging them in situations. So we can go through how they've been practicing, what their closing ratios are like, uh,
Hmm.
and maybe run through some certain scenarios and objections and how they can overcome them as they start to find them and see them more in the wild.
So they have that similar type of process that you have for the owner, but it's all geared towards marketing and sales,
Right.
right?
We'll
Identifying
remove all
prospects and
the
closing them.
exactly.
Right.
We'll remove all the
Removal.
owner specific items. Yep.
Right. And then I would imagine from what you said on the technician side, once they get that training from headquarters, you're then relying on the owner operator to certify or to verify that the to help to do the coaching on the skill development for the technician, right? Like they're
Right.
that they installed it properly, that they
Mhm.
do the visual,
Yeah.
they stop by, they make sure it's going well, address any installation issues that might be happening because
Yeah.
it's a slightly different situation, and how do I do it with this particular type of window and these particular type of coverings, right?
Right. And those like in examples like that where we have an owner that's obviously it's following up to make sure that installer is now functioning as a proper member of their team. That constant coaching, right? The unscheduled regular cadence calls that we'll have with owners to go through their KPIs to see some of these operational measurements to see how they're performing. Those are
Yeah.
usually some of the first items that we'll discuss is how the new team members performing and how they've affected some of those operational measurements. So what their reorder rate is like, if there has been any change in their Google rating since that person was brought on board. We'll kind of look over those things, but more often than not, the owner is aware of those issues before I actually get a chance to discuss it with them, just because they're so in tuned, and
Right.
more than likely they're hearing about it from their customers before I have a chance to even see it at the end of a month and schedule a call to go through. Hey, it looks like we're seeing something here that's affecting some numbers
Okay.
for it. Yeah.
That's interesting that you're then looking at the Google ratings or the Trust Advisor rate, the
Hmm.
online ratings, to see, hey, in this geography, in this MSA, are we seeing any dip? And does is it? And then you're sitting there because you're training all these people. We
Hmm.
just trained Bill, and
Yeah.
2 months later, they went from a 5-star to a 4-star, right?
Right.
And
Or
you said,
how do we
yeah,
see the ratings over the last what are the ratings over the last 4 months isolated compared to what they were before, right? Like
yeah, that's what I mean.
you're a
Like, they were
4-star
like,
over the last 4 months, or we saw your RGAs over the last 4 months pop up or
right,
increase. Are we seeing a consistent reorder or mismeasurement item here, or we're seeing your operating expenses have increased as a disproportionate amount of your revenue all of a
right.
sudden. There's something fishy going on here. Are you aware of it? Let's dive deeper into it and find the issue before it
That's
becomes
really
a
cool.
bigger problem.
Yeah, and again, this has been really interesting because, like I said, you usually don't see in franchise systems first the coaching element of the training program. You'll see it initially with the owner operator, right? Like
Mhm.
I think as an industry, we do a good job on getting those owner operators up to speed, launched, train their initial set of staff if it's a larger type of operation where you have to bring staff on initially and provide that initial guidance. But then 6 months later, when they start bringing in other people, I think as an industry, maybe we've got the the knowledge acquisition side, but we don't have the skill building side. And so the interesting thing here is you've got that all built into your model. But then just like, it's the 5 to 10% that we see the skill building side, we very rarely see the performance metric side. Right. And it's
Yeah,
real,
and that
which takes you to the next level, which is you're not just competent. You just don't have that skill competency. You're actually you're talking about performance levels and things like rework rates or reorder rates, or customer satisfaction metrics. Like, it could be Google ratings. It could be surveys that go out. So I think that's fascinating. That's really great. You really are incorporating a number of very sophisticated things into your program. It's really cool to
yeah, and
see.
to be honest with you, that's probably the part that I enjoy the most is being able to actually back data into it,
Yeah.
and going through that with the owners that have been in place for a long time. And then obviously that helps their validation calls as well, because now they can actually provide answers into very specific questions that can come up during those calls. I'm only starting to get into that process and seeing how the franchise development side works. But more often than not, I used to see a lot of these questions come in to where is someone coming in to, explore the franchisee space.
Hmm.
More often than not, they really don't know what it is they don't know. And so they
Right.
don't they
Right.
don't have they don't have the knowledge to ask the questions that they think would be most beneficial. And so actually teeing up existing owners with a lot of that data that they previously may not have had or utilized lets them lead the conversation to kind of approach a potential franchisee to ask the right questions that they feel as though would be the most beneficial, right? A current franchisee can say, well, I know that if I was in your shoes, I would have wanted to know more about X, Y, and Z because before
Hmm.
I didn't know it up until recently, right? And now you can basically show them this information before they even knew it was available.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you raise that because there are those three categories. Like, you know what you don't know, and then you don't know what you don't know. And it's
Yeah,
that last
that's
category that can
that's the
really
tough one.
nail
Yeah,
you. That's the tough one. So let me circle back.
yeah.
When a franchisee brings somebody on, are they required to send that person through that training, or is that at the franchisee's discretion? Because it's not
Mhm.
an inexpensive thing to send somebody to a week or two of training at headquarters. You got to pay the guy. You got there's travel expense. It's not cheap. Is that is that a requirement, or is that at the franchisee's discretion and they're highly encouraged to do it,
Yeah,
or are
I
they
would.
incented to do it?
Yeah, it's a highly encouraged thing to do.
Okay.
We like to tell the franchisees that we need them to do it. But because of the level of involvement that they may have or where their business may be and
Hmm.
at what level of involvement that particular employee may have, like I would tell you one of the big steps in that growth phase is the part-time employee. So before a benchmark for a
Hmm.
franchisee to hire that full-time individual, they need to be utilizing third-party workers or a part-time individual. And
Right.
usually that's because they really can't afford to keep somebody full-time yet. And to have them or require them to send somebody like that to training, it's too much of a financial burden, especially
Right.
early on, to warrant that. And so encouraging them to keep it as a highly encouraged piece, especially if it's somebody that's part-time, gives them that fluidity to where they can actually give them one, do the vetting on their own to say, okay, you can more than likely find somebody that
Mhm.
has the required experience, especially as an installer. You're really just looking for someone that has the handyman capabilities, rinse and repeat what you have already shown them or you already know. But should they, after they've been with you for so long, they'll pick this stuff up relatively quickly. And then once you're actually giving them to a position where they can be facing to a customer and you've gotten to this next benchmark where you are comfortable and we feel as though you can bring them on full time, let's invest the rest of that into a full training process, right? And typically, once we get to that point, I can't think of many cases to where we've got someone that hasn't want to make the investment in someone to go through the proper training process.
So, question: since you're looking at those back end metrics, and you're having those regular touch bases with the franchise owner, has has it ever come up that the metrics were slipping, and then you discovered that they had brought somebody on board that had not been properly trained?
Yeah, once or twice. Yeah,
Yeah.
noticed it.
Yeah, okay. Where you're like, well, because I asked that
Yeah.
because that type of metric is, I've seen it at some clients. Like I said, only a handful of
Mhm.
companies actually get down to that level of business impact. But the best example I saw for that was, Chrysler was a client of ours for a long time, and they had that data that a trained salesperson sold twice as many vehicles as an untrained salesperson,
Yeah.
and a trained technician had a fixed first visit score, which is that reorder thing.
Yeah.
It's the fixed first visit score that was 15 points higher than an untrained technician. And then everybody could do the math. The average sales guy sells so many vehicles. And so if you can double that, it's worth X dollars to the company. And, the average repair is X dollars. And if you can do that, and the average tech does so many repairs a year, and you can figure out the math of what it's worth to the company. Right.
Yeah,
And
relatively quickly. Yeah.
relatively quickly. And the cool thing is that metric of trained versus untrained went viral through the company. It's a large company, right?
Yeah.
Went viral through the company. It was so viral that back in 2009, when they went through bankruptcy, level of training at a dealership was part of the equation as to which dealers they closed. And they, if you remember back in the Great Recession,
Yep.
GM, Ford, and GM and Chrysler went through bankruptcy. Ford went through a contract. Yeah, they all went through a contraction. And I was like, it's kind of a negative example, but it shows you when training becomes a real strategic asset. If you're up there and you're talking about the survival of the company, and you're
Mhm.
bringing in training as one of the metrics, right? Not the only, but
Yeah.
one of the things you consider when, like, what partners am I keeping? What cars am I dumping? And so that's why I asked the question. Is I saw how that performance of trained versus untrained just goes viral, and then gets up to, is easy to communicate. And so if you had, anecdotal evidence of, oh, we've seen that, we got a once, there's been a number of times when people didn't go through this, and we saw, a 5%, 5-point increase in a reorder rate, or a 1-star reduction in there, that sells the program more than anything I've seen,
Right.
especially to the franchisees. Because not only did it go viral up through the organization, but it went viral through the dealer community.
The whole community. Yeah, I can imagine. No, and it's funny you say that because it's not only the situation where we've had, technicians, right, that haven't gone through training, but more often than not, we'll have ownership groups that'll come in, right, and they'll typically assign a executive to participate in training. And we've even had situations to where maybe another owner that hasn't participated in our training program during the onboarding process
Right.
is actually the individual that started getting involved in the business, and they're the ones that triggered the slip in the metrics, right? So it's actually maybe not necessarily a technician,
Right,
but
right,
maybe
right.
somebody that was originally part of the ownership group, but just didn't come through, someone else that didn't come through the training process. But
Yeah, well, they were one of the 3 partners that didn't show up, right?
sure. But all of a sudden they decided to step in and start
Yeah.
taking a bigger responsibility in the business. And okay, well,
Yeah.
maybe you should
Yeah,
come to
if you've got that anecdotal evidence,
yeah.
my suggestion would be, if you have that information, and it's really cool that you've gone down to the
Yeah, I'm
performance
gonna need to do
metrics to
that
come
now.
back. If you can tease out the impact of a trained technician, a trained salesperson, a trained owner, and it it just is, it's, so much what we do on the learning development side, it's really hard to prove that this training caused this increase in performance, right? Because that's a causal relationship. You need advanced statistics. It's not even correlation. It's Bayesian analysis. Nobody knows how to do it. And especially nobody I don't know how to do it. And I'm a math geek, but it's sophisticated, and statistics, and most of us don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
But also, most people don't know how to interpret the results, even if you have somebody do it for you. But that trained versus untrained, everybody gets that. everybody gets that.
Mhm.
Everybody understands. And then everybody can do the math of what that means. So if you've gone to since you're going and getting that performance feedback loop in, anything you can do to say
Yeah,
trained
we're gonna have to
versus
start
untrained.
using
Yeah.
that. I had to make a note because that's something we're gonna have to start advertising a little bit more to the group.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it helps with the compliance of getting them come in. If you can,
Mm.
if you have
Buy-in.
data that says that, then it's like, yeah, it's not just a good thing. It's like,
Yeah.
I can tell you, I can, I can predict
Well,
what's going to happen.
right. No, it's funny because we do the same thing for marketing techniques, right? I mean, and those can vary based on market conditions. But I'll do the same thing to get buy-in for certain tactics that way. But
Right.
haven't tried the same thing for like an internal training program. So that's
Yeah.
interesting to
Yeah.
put it in perspective that way.
Yeah. Especially since you've already gone. I mean, I mentioned that to all of our clients, but like I said, the vast majority of the industry is still trying to go from knowledge acquisition to skill development, and then much less, performance impact, right? So you're
Right.
still trying to make that first jump. You've already made the two jumps of you've got the knowledge acquisition, you've got the skill development, and now you're focused on performance, and you've got the performance feedback mechanism, the performance metrics that are coming in. And so, all right, I said enough about that.
Yeah. Thanks.
But but that's really cool. That's really cool. So, just I'm having a lot of fun. So I hope you're having a lot of
Yeah,
fun.
no, this is
Uh,
honestly, this has been great. I'm glad that you had me on. This has been a lot
yeah,
of fun. You've made me feel like I'm doing a lot of good work here. It's good.
I think. Well, I think you had a really interesting program going on, so we should be shouting from the rooftops here,
Good.
as this
I'll
is a
start doing
great
more of
great
that.
thing to emulate. What are the biggest challenges you face when you're trying to do this? I mean, it sounds like you got a pretty good, um, even way to get buy-in, right? Because it's voluntary, but even without the metrics specifically,
Mm.
sounds like you have a high compliance people doing it a lot, and it's the exception when it's not happening, and then it's showing up, and you're like, hey, see. So, what are the biggest challenges you guys face in trying to drive that training program?
For me, to be honest with you, it's going back to the data. To me, it's showing the validity in that information. It's the data itself. I think that
Okay.
because of how much information we're tracking and then how it compares to what a certain owner may feel being in the field day in and day out. Um, when we go through some of this information and I show, talking about closing ratios, for example, how they may have been closing in the last 30 days versus what they may think they've been closing in the last 30 days, it's pretty common that they get the feeling that they've been closing better than, or worse even, than what I may be showing them. And even just that discrepancy in gut, um, I lose buy-in sometimes in the data that I'm showing them, and then it starts putting a question into, okay, what else is it that I don't trust, or what else is it that I
Right.
don't see in this that I can utilize, right? And it really just takes one set of data for a customer. I say, see, I'm doing it again. I'm talking about customers, not franchisees.
Right.
Uh, but it only takes one set of data for a franchisee to go into and all of a sudden put into question everything else in front of them. And so to me, that's kind of been where my struggle has been, is wanting to get or continued buy-in from metrics that, granted that I believe them to be very true, right? Because I've built out how they're collected, how they're calculated. But even then, we could make the assumption, let's say they're not perfect, right?
Hmm.
And you probably know this as well, Jeff, is if even if they weren't, we know that the trends that exist in this data set are true. And that's in
Right.
reality, that's what we really are gunning after. As long as the trends hold true, while the data may not be perfect, the trends that they're showing are. And that's what
100%.
and that's really what's going to show us what actions we need to take. You may not be you may not have been closing at 80, but we do know that whatever this number was calculating, you went from 80 to 60. And whatever that delta is shows a problem. And so we need to be able to make that change and make that adjustment. And so being able to relay that kind of information to somebody that maybe doesn't come from a statistics background or a data analytics background can sometimes be difficult to bridge, but it just takes a little bit of time, effort, and continued coaching to help bring them around to understanding that piece of it, and ultimately seeing where their bottom line currently is and being the one that's helping them get back to
Hmm.
where they need to be, um, helps bring them back around to buy into it.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I've had a lot of, if I take my training hat on, or I put my manager hat on, especially
Mm.
in marketing and sales. I've had a lot of discussions over the years with staff of that exact issue. which is, we'll say, oh, the close rate, you're closing, 20% of qualified leads or whatever, right?
Sure.
And we'll argue about the number, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's like, no, it's 50, I'm closing 30, or like it, like, and all the data is, I had a marketing research professor and, when I was getting my MBA, and the first thing she did on the board, and there were, and we had a bunch of engineers, and I was one of them,
Yeah.
in our class. And the first thing she goes, this is market research. And I know you got a lot of, engineering, math type folks here. So I'm just going to put this up on the board now. And goes, when you do market research, you need to assume
Yeah.
this is,
Yep.
we're, yeah, and you're going to put models in place to try and approximate reality, but they will not be the ultimate reality. But then to your point, which is interesting, is, well, it doesn't really matter to me whether the true closing rate was 20 or 25. The question is, what was it a year ago and what is it today? And what direction are we heading in?
Yep.
Right. And the trend data, I think that's a really important thing. And I think it's something people have a hard time with because they like to argue the validity of the number. And you're like,
Yep.
okay, well, whatever systemic discrepancy there was in collecting the number, it's consistent, right?
Right. That's really all it is. It's not about the number. It's about how the number is calculated and then it's done the same way every day and how it's been done in the history of how we've been collecting this information. Because it's all about the trend. We just want to know that when we started doing whatever change it is we did, it was this number. And then when we completed whatever test it is we were doing, it was now this number. Well, did it go up or down?
Right.
What went up? Okay, good. We need to do more of what we just did. Did it go down? Okay, we need to do less of what we just did because we want that number to go back up again. But no, it's those things. It's those little nuances over the little pieces of data about arguing the finite number versus the trend that exists in any one of the sets of data that we track and utilize to make those business adjustments.
Yeah. It's on the trend, which I think a lot of people don't get in their guts. One thing I found that helps is I use physical directions, right? It's like, look, if we're really precise, it means I'm giving you the directions to get from Ann Arbor to San Francisco, right? Go down 23, hop on 80 and go, right?
Yeah.
And you'll be in San Francisco. That's a very precise number, right? That's a very precise, I've done the statistics. I got the R values, blah, blah, blah. But there's a lot of value just in knowing I'm heading west
Right. Yeah.
and I'm not heading east, right? And so trends are about I'm heading west, right? And I'm moving towards my goal of California or San Francisco. And even if I don't have the precision that we would all like, I still know I'm heading towards the goal as opposed to away from the goal.
Yeah.
And that's or I'm heading east, and I'm definitely not gonna. It's going
Well,
to take a long time to get to San Francisco.
and then depending on the system you're using, there was a time, and you can appreciate this, is getting to that level of precision. How much time and energy are you going to spend, especially when you're a
Exactly.
when you're a single owner operator? Are you willing to spend, not with a customer trying to sell more product to get that level of precision? When in reality, if I just know I need to go west, I can get halfway there by the time you figure out exactly where I need to go, and I'm going to beat you there. You
Right,
know?
right. Exactly. Well, exactly. You keep working out the maps.
Yeah,
I'm just
I'm going to
heading on
start
80
running.
west.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
going
going
to
to hop
start
in the
going.
car and go, and
And
I'll
I'm
be
going.
there. Yeah,
Yeah, and when the sun starts setting, as long as I'm going that,
yeah.
but it's interesting. I noticed that it's those things that help people kind of feel it, and it's pretty interesting. So shift, kind of wrapping up the training. What's in the future for the what do you see coming down the pipe with everybody's talking about AI and
Yeah, so
generative AI and all that kind of fun stuff.
for us, I think it actually ties in really well with what we were talking about, is that the level of precision and accuracy and being able to see those trends
Mm-hmm.
populate automatically with our, dashboard software that basically captures all of this information that we're talking about. For me, being able to have automatic notifications for any issues that may pop up before they populate, we have a good understanding of what metrics indicate red flags, if you will, with franchisees, and essentially giving that information to artificial intelligence or integrating it into those existing dashboards to basically tell me before I had the opportunity to do the research myself, say, hey, it looks like these locations are going to need some method of conversation coming up
Mhm.
regarding these metrics, or these changes have taken place. These are probably, or with likely probability, the items that are need to be discussed coming up. Or better yet, some of the other items we talked about is talking about those experimental tests when it comes to sales and marketing. Okay, well, let's say I'm going to run a television ad for my franchise location in San Francisco for the next 3 months. Well, let me let my KPI tracker know that. And so for the next 3 months, let it manage and keep tabs on all of my measurables. And then
Right.
once my experiment is done, let it tell me what it's done to my metrics. What was the impact of that ad campaign that I ran? And then let me compile that data at a franchise level to say, okay, now instead of me having to capture all this information relatively manually, let the artificial intelligence capture this and then give me a case study on what has the impact been with this particular style of ad campaign. And now let's distribute that to the franchise system so they can start utilizing it. And that's just, thinking strictly about the sales and marketing aspect of it. But, we start implementing that into a training portion of it. What about the next iteration of training? If I wanted to have an advanced level sales process that we offered to franchisees once they've been in the system for a handful of years, right? We want to start really getting granular with how we can boost sales. Maybe we do something similar to that, right? That's how I see us integrating artificial intelligence, or at least that's how we started to integrate it with our system today.
I really like, I really like it. And it goes to the completeness of your program, which is really very cool, very unusual, is that you're starting with the end in mind, right? It's like, this is the impact. I want to hit this impact and let me work my way backwards. How do I change my processes? How do I, change the content? And then how do I change the training? And I think it's brilliant. So
Well, it's
that's
scientific. It's following. You talk about the engineering backgrounds, the chemical, or the chemistry backgrounds, the same way. It's really just following the scientific method. You test something, you see how it works, and you go back and make adjustments until you get the result you want. Right. So it's funny how much it relates to business.
yes, yes, definitely. Shifting gears a little, one thing I mentioned to you earlier was I'm doing this workshop for emerging franchise wars in February at the IFA annual convention. You guys hit that magic number of 100 plus units and you continue to cruise up there. What advice would you have for an emerging franchisor that might have, a handful of corporate units and maybe a handful of franchise units out there in terms of scaling but scaling without sacrificing quality, right? Like that's, it's a hard thing because you get the thing going and you got the one guy that has, or the handful of people that have everything in their heads. Yeah. What are some of the things you would suggest?
Oh, it's probably the same thing you would, Jeff. I mean, it's the SOPs, it's the processes, it's writing all this stuff down. I mean, what's the book? We were talking about we talked about E-Myth. The one that I'm talking about, shoot, it's going to drive me crazy thinking about it. But essentially, having all of these things written, building the basis of your systems and your processes and procedures down, so that you can start onboarding the individuals that are going to start taking over each one of these steps for you.
Mhm.
Because I mean, our brand was no different from it, where we literally had the family, the Stewart brothers, did every aspect of onboarding, training, and the ongoing training of our franchise system up until 5 years ago. And it was only because they had developed these processes out to where they could start one by one hiring other members to, okay, well, I'm going to slowly offload the onboarding process to somebody. Okay, I'm going to slowly offboard the product training and ongoing support to somebody. Okay, I'm going to slowly onboard someone for the franchise development to somebody. And they were only able to transition to that in a level of quality because they had built out processes to allow them to follow exactly what their recipe was, kind of similar to how you would with a franchise anyway, so that they could, without skipping a beat, continue what they had already built on and leveraged. And thankfully, because they're still involved with the business, if there ever was a question or something that wasn't built out, it's just a matter of kind of turning around and reaching over to ask a question and just going from there. So it's just creating that repeatable process so that even if someone isn't in the office, it's step one, step 2, step 3, and always having it accessible.
So going back to what you said, it's the SOP, it's the it's the standard process, the process, and then having the
Actually,
systems in place to support the process. Would that be a good like
yeah, it sounds like a good Jason Garrett impersonation, but yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Uh, great. Well, thank you so much for your time. Before we go, is there anything else you want to convey to the audience or out there? We've covered a lot of ground. I really appreciate the insights
No,
that you provided.
this was a lot of fun. I'm glad you had me on. Now, I guess the only plug I'd have is, if anyone's interested in checking out Bloomin Blinds, they can reach out to me. My email is jake.wharton@bloominblinds.com. But no, seriously, I had a lot of fun today. I'm glad we got to cover so much. And anytime you want to have me back on, I'm game.
Yeah. Well, by any chance, are you guys going to be at the IFA convention in February?
Yeah, there'll be probably a few team members of ours at IFA this year.
Okay. Well, let's make sure we get together and at least have a beer or something.
Yeah, that'd
Be
be great.
good to shake
Love it.
hands. Hey, thanks a lot for your time, Jake, and I really appreciate it. It was really informative, and I think people are going to love this. So thank you, and that to everybody out there, all the listeners and viewers, thank you for your time and focus, and we appreciate your continued viewership and listening. So have a good one.
Thanks, everybody.